That morning, sunlight in South Georgia filtered through the bars of the courtroom windows, casting muted rays that could not dispel the suffocating tension. Tamara Clayton, a 38-year-old black former Marine, sniper, stood motionless before Judge Prescott, blood still warm around her wrists from the painfully tight handcuffs. The scene looked like a tragicomic tableau, one hand heavy with medals, the other smeared with blood and steel. Before anyone could gasp, the courtroom doors slammed open, and four-star General Gavin Grant strode to the bench, every stripe on his uniform gleaming like battle honors. Clearing his throat, he made the entire room jump. "Your Honor, this entire case is built on prejudice and lies." Silence fell so complete, even the courtroom cameras seemed to hesitate. Then the general softened, half teasing. "By the way, let's see where everyone's watching from. Drop it in the comments." Behind him, the screen rewound to that fateful morning in Oakwood Springs, a picturesque little Georgia town, if you overlooked its deep-seated biases. Tamara, clutching a takeaway coffee, entered the neighborhood grocery store with relaxed confidence. She spotted Mrs. Abernathy, an 84-year-old white woman, slip and tumble just inside the door. Without a second thought, Tamara knelt to help, lifting the elder gently onto a bench, her gaze warm and steady, like a guardian angel in combat boots. But before Tamara could crack a reassuring smile, the sheriff's cruiser screeched into the parking lot. Sheriff Carlton Price leapt out, pistol drawn faster than you could say, "Good morning. Take your hands off her now," he barked. "Mrs. Abernathy stammered, "She's helping me." Yet, in Sheriff Price's world, that phrase apparently didn't exist. What followed was a spectacle worthy of dark comedy. Tamara was slammed against the tile wall, yanked down in one swift motion, and cuffed so tightly her skin split. Blood trickled onto the floral print floor tiles. The deputies looked on, smirking as though auditioning for a cop drama. The chaotic scene, guns, blood, handcuffs, and a sheriff's sneer left the onlookers gasping. Tamara's silhouette, rigid and unbowed, served as a stark reminder that racial prejudice isn't confined to dusty history books, but lurks in plain sight, ready to pounce on everyday kindness. And in this small town, what started as a simple act of assistance was about to ignite a battle for justice. That afternoon at Oakwood Springs Police Station felt less like justice and more like a bad reality show. Officer Tamara Clayton, decorated Marine sniper turned improbable suspect, was slapped with 3 outrageously stacked charges: assault, robbery, and resisting arrest. The source? Personal assessment of Sheriff Price, as he coolly sipped his coffee in a corner office. When Tamara asked for her military ID and DD 214, the deputy on paperwork duty shrugged and muttered, "Body cam's malfunction must be a glitch." The miracle of vanishing credentials earned a collective eye roll across the squad room. Meanwhile, bail was set at $50,000, an amount that, for most, might as well have been Monopoly money. Judge Prescott leaned back in his robe, raised an eyebrow, and chirped, "Standard procedure," as if humiliation in Oakwood Springs came with a neatly printed syllabus. That first night in her cell was Oakwood Springs 101 in custodial cruelty. The sheets were soaked from an accidental spill, her blood-blued wrist marks went unbandaged, and she was placed in protective isolation, a polite euphemism for solitary humiliation. All for her own safety, the guards assured, their voices syrupy with feigned concern. It was almost comical, if not for the sting of betrayal. But Tamara, ever disciplined, closed her eyes and retreated to Afghanistan's icy peaks, where she once held dead still for 18 hours, mastered patience, and eliminated targets with cold precision. She catalogued every indignity: the guard who whispered racial slurs under his breath, the cellmate who vanished the moment her witness statement was filed, the water-stained mattress that gleamed like a totem of bureaucratic apathy. Through the dim light and stale air, she saw a pattern. Oakwood Springs had a subroutine for disappearing inconvenient truths under internal review. Veterans and travelers of color were just the latest batch. Every camera error hid a prejudice. Soaked decision, every shredded report preserved a system's shameful secret. When a restless guard poked his flashlight under the door, Tamara opened one eye and grinned. "You planning another surprise inspection, or just forgot your manners?" she quipped. The guard jerked back, as if electrocuted by her calm defiance. In that frozen moment, Tamara knew this was no mere bond hearing or bail negotiation. It was a crucible, a chance to force the sheriff's department to expose its rotting core. Even behind these bars, she vowed, she would not retreat. This was not only her fight for freedom, but a battle to tear the local coercive machinery wide open, privately brutal and publicly hypocritical. And she had every intention of turning its hidden gears into daylight. The next morning, Tamara Clayton met her court-appointed advocate, Gavin Reed, in a windowless conference room that smelled faintly of stale coffee and despair. At 29, Gavin was the county's rookie public defender, idealistic, green, and already drowning in case files. He perched on the edge of a folding chair, cleared his throat, and slid a manila envelope across the table. "Miss Clayton, the prosecution has offered a plea deal. 6 months with eligibility for parole after 3. It's—" Tamara raised an eyebrow so sharply it could have sliced paper. She folded her arms, her voice cool as Georgia morning dew. "I've committed no crime. I was helping an elderly lady." Gavin blinked. "I understand, but the judge—" "Under standard procedure?" she interjected, leaning back so her orange jumpsuit nearly slipped off the chair. "I read your case notes. You're young, bright. I don't need mercy. I need justice." He swallowed. "Well, your military record: 3 Afghan deployments, 32 confirmed targets, Bronze Star." "I'm not negotiating on valor," Tamara replied, a ghost of a smile dancing on her lips. "I'm negotiating on facts." "Huh!" Her measured calm rattled Gavin's confidence. He pushed the envelope away. "Okay, no deal. We fight." By midday, he'd filed a FOIA request for the body cam footage. The reply, helpfully typed and completely useless, blamed a technical glitch. Even the county's IT department found that excuse laughably thin. Through a contact in the district attorney's office, Gavin obtained a raw download, 32 minutes of unedited video showing Tamara standing with hands raised, assisting Mrs. Abernathy, as deputies swarmed Mississippi mud-splattered boots clashing against polished courtroom etiquette. Mrs. Abernathy's shrill protests, "She's helping me!" echoed like a dirge for common sense. As the grainy footage played on his laptop, Gavin's face paled. A flicker of anger ignited. Oakwood Springs PD was pocketing federal grants tied to conviction rates, treating travelers of color like ATM machines they could rob at will. Each arrest padded their budget. Each plea locked another dollar in. That afternoon, as he stepped out of his car, Gavin spotted an ominous note tucked beneath his windshield wiper. "Drop the Clayton case if you know what's good for you." He crumpled the paper, heart pounding in military cadence. Tamara's quiet defiance had drawn a target not just on her back but on his. Still, he straightened his tie, squared his shoulders, and vowed, they wouldn't cower. Not now, not ever. This was no longer merely a defense of one innocent woman, but a reckoning with a town that had weaponized its badge. And Gavin Reed, once content to shuffle papers, was ready to litigate a conspiracy of prejudice and profit straight into daylight. Gavin's next call was to Harper Sutton, the tenacious investigative reporter whose byline alone could make corrupt officials break into a cold sweat. When he described Tamara's plight, handcuffed snipers aren't exactly headline fodder, Harper's eyes sparkled. "I've been waiting for a case this juicy," she quipped, sliding a stack of manila folders across her cluttered desk. Within hours, Harper had unearthed over 213 complaints lodged against Officer Brantley's squad over the past 8 years each, one quietly marked, "handled internally." That phrase, she noted, was local code for "buried forever." She dialed nervous witnesses at all hours, a trembling college student who'd been roughed up for jaywalking, a trucker haunted by memories of being pinned face down on his rig's hood. Every whispered story became another breadcrumb in a trail of systematic abuse. "Why won't they show the video?" Harper asked one sheriff's deputy on the record. He coughed and muttered something about camera malfunctions, as if malfunctioning technology was Oakwood Springs' official mascot. Harper pored over redacted memos, pairing them with leaked emails from the chief's office. In one internal memo she found, the department bragged that convictions generate grant money. In another, a sergeant joked, "Dark-skinned travelers make the best stats, never stick around to fight." Her fingers flew across the keyboard as she contrasted original police reports, subject displayed non-compliance. With the doctored versions, subject exhibited imminent threat behavior. She annotated every discrepancy, turning footnotes into moral grenades. By twilight, her exposé was ready. When the article hit the front page of the Oakwood Gazette, the headline screamed, "213 complaints, zero accountability. How Oakwood Springs profits from racial profiling." Editorial cartoons depicted Brantley's squad as carnival hucksters, luring unsuspecting black motorists into their revenue booth. The reaction was immediate. Across town, protesters held signs reading, "Stop the prejudice profits," and "Manhunt for justice, not dark skin." Even the mayor, whose golf buddy was the sheriff, found himself on the defensive in an emergency press conference that sounded more like damage control than leadership. In her office, Harper leaned back and sipped a well-earned espresso. "You know," she murmured to Gavin over the phone, "I half expect Brantley to show up at my door in full riot gear." He laughed nervously. "If he does, remind him I'll be ready with subpoenas." Between Tamara's calm resilience and Harper's unflinching bravado, the crooked gears of Oakwood Springs' justice machine were grinding to a halt. Their alliance forged a new beacon of hope that in this small southern town, the color of one's skin would no longer be a profit center, especially not when someone was watching. Judge Malcolm Varelli stared at the letter from Harper Sutton as if it were a live grenade. Her handwriting, neat yet urgent, warned of a deep root, hard to detect, entwined within both the courthouse and the sheriff's department. He leaned back in his leather chair, tapped the paper against his palm, then snapped it shut. "Time to pull some weeds," he muttered. Within hours, Varelli summoned a special review panel to re-examine 3 cold cases personally overseen by Sheriff Price and Vasis. On the surface, each had been signed off as no misconduct detected. But when Varelli's team pried the lids off restless case files, a different pattern emerged. Witness statements with entire paragraphs blacked out, dashcam footage mysteriously corrupted, and affidavits from terrified neighbors later rescinded under questionable circumstances. Page 47, Varelli barked at his clerk. "Highlight the date that camera went offline again." He pointed at the sheriff's internal memo. "Camera malfunctions correlate with inconvenient angles." A ripple of disbelief swept the panel. One clerk, voice trembling, whispered, "Your Honor, even our office coffee machine works more reliably." But Varelli's real coup de théâtre was resurrecting the Crooms family case, the tragic death of 16-year-old Malik Crooms, who'd been strangled during an arrest 2 years prior. That file had been buried under a pile of routine clearance paperwork until now. Varelli slammed it onto the conference table. "We missed something," he declared. "I want every log, every scribble, every shred of evidence." In the days that followed, forensic analysts unearthed chilling details. A crucial page mislabeled, "Lost in Transit," deputy's radio chatter redacted, and a deputy's own handwritten apology never disclosed, confessing he felt bad about Malik's restraint, but feared retribution if he spoke up. The courtroom's usual hush transformed into a low hum of anticipation. The very machinery designed to shield Price and his allies was creaking under judicial scrutiny. At a press briefing, Varelli's voice was calm but carried the force of a gavel strike. "This court will not tolerate a ballet of cover-ups." Reporters snapped photos as he added, with a wry half-smile, "We're not just dusting off old filesware, excavating systemic injustice." The local police union bristled, but even they couldn't mask the swell of public interest. Across town, Sheriff Price watched the headlines and ground his teeth. The silent code of "no questions asked" was cracking, exposed by a single judge's refusal to look away. In Oakwood Springs, a month of complacency gave way to a firestorm. For the first time, the community saw that unchecked power could be challenged and that justice might finally get its overdue turn in the spotlight. The special trial was moved to the grand courtroom, its vaulted ceiling echoing every gasp and murmur now, open to press and public alike. The gallery was packed shoulder to shoulder, prior victims clutching worn-out affidavits, children who'd witnessed last night's brutality pressed to their parents' sides, and a sea of Tamara's supporters wearing pins that read, "Justice for Clayton." Cameras blinked red as reporters jockeyed for the best angle. Sheriff Carlton Price, resplendent in a freshly pressed uniform, shuffled onto the witness stand as if walking into his own funeral. Judge Varelli's gaze bore into him. The questions came rapid fire. "Sheriff, why aren't white citizens treated like this? Why does a helping hand become a crime when it's offered by a black woman?" Price's voice cracked as he stumbled through platitudes about standard procedure and officer safety. Every answer was a thin veneer cracking under the glare of public scrutiny. At the prosecutor's table, Aurora Reed's civil rights heavyweight and Tamara's fierce ally leaned in to Gavin Reed, her eyes gleaming. When it was her turn, she struck like a lightning bolt. "Dr. Phillips," she said, addressing the hand-picked psychologist whose plush credentials once impressed local juries, "can you explain why you deem a white suspect's glare assertive, but a black suspect's identical look threatening?" The doctor's throat bobbed. He cleared it twice before admitting under oath, "My, research guidelines are somewhat fluid." A stifled chuckle rippled through the courtroom. Next, a uniformed officer took the stand. Aurora's tone turned faux sympathetic. "Officer Barnes, would you treat Mrs. Abernathy the same way you treated Miss Clayton?" Barnes's stiff salute betrayed him. "Ma'am, each situation is unique." Aurora arched a brow. "So unique that one grandmother gets helped off the ground, another gets slammed into it?" Barnes's cheeks went pink. Then Mrs. Abernathy herself was called. The elderly woman hobbled up, cane-tapping, and said with tremulous indignation, "Tamara was saving me. When I protested, they shoved me aside as if my words didn't matter." Shocked whispers filled the room. Behind locked bars, Officer Travis Brantley sat hunched, tasting his first real dose of accountability. He cast nervous glances around, realizing his scripted bravado had evaporated. Prosecutors exchanged helpless looks. Defense counsel fumbled through notes that suddenly felt worthless. Judge Varelli leaned forward, voice low and unforgiving. "Sheriff Price, you can't seriously claim you perceived a threat based on a gaze. Don't tell me that your threat assessment is colorblind when your actions speak otherwise." Outside, the crowd echoed the judge's fury in subdued roars. Hands clenched, hearts pounding, they stood on the brink of history ready to witness a turning point in Oakwood Springs, where silence would no longer be an option and justice had finally found its megaphone. 3 months have passed since the walls of Oakwood Springs shook with Tamara Clayton's courage. Now, Sheriff Carlton Price sits suspended in federal lockup, indicted on charges of civil rights violations and abuse of power. The man who once barked orders now finds himself on the receiving end of a supine apoetic justice that the town whispers about in stunned delight. At headquarters, Deputy Denise Reed, whose quiet defiance first cracked the department's code of silences, slides into the interim sheriff's chair. Her uniform is immaculate, but her eyes are fierce. "We're not just changing policies," she announces to the assembled staff. "We're changing culture. If you pull that trigger next time without cause, you'll face consequences that would make Sheriff Price look like a Boy Scout." A ripple of nervous laughter passes through the room. Reed's humor is a reminder. Power must now be tempered by accountability. Meanwhile, an independent oversight agency is born overnight. Its charter draconian, in the best way possible. Zero tolerance for unwarranted force. No more handled internally loopholes. Every complaint is now an open record, every office under public eye. Even the memory of internal investigations that used to vanish into dusty filing cabinets is officially declared extinct. Civil rights attorney Aurora Reed and investigative journalist Harper Sutton, now dubbed the Dynamic Duo of Justice, launched the Victims of Power Abuse Support Office. Their first workshop, When Your Rights Become Optional, draws curious teenagers, jittery patrol officers, and even a few skeptical sergeants. Aurora drills them with scenarios. If a citizen refuses to kneel for you, is that probable cause? No? Then stop wrestling them to the ground. Harper adds wry commentary. And no, you can't misplace the body cam footage again. Oh. They roll out a curriculum on racial bias, civil liberties, and professional conscience to high schools, community centers, and even roadside sheriff's posts. Coffee shop conversations in neighboring towns now include talk of Oak Springs standards, a checklist of do's and don'ts for any officer interacting with civilians. Within weeks, Precincts across the county install new camera overwatch systems. Roll call training pivots from how to control crowds to how to respect them. Reports flood in. Officer Sanchez restrained a suspect for 6 seconds, apologized afterward, and offered water. It's disarmingly mundane, and precisely the point. Oakwood Springs has become both cautionary tale and hopeful blueprint. A town once notorious for disappearing complaints now peers out from behind its new transparent policies, watching itself grow. The old guard may grumble about political correctness, but citizens have found their voice and they're using it. After all, when checks and balances finally balance, even the smallest towns can set a reckoning in motion. 6 months later, the sight of WatchGuard volunteers in tactical gear and oversight force, founded by Darnell Thompson, had become a familiar presence outside courthouses and police stations across the United States. What began as a handful of veterans on duty quietly evolved into a movement numbering in the thousands, each member wearing a small badge inscribed with "Watching Justice" and standing with unwavering resolve. They maintained silent vigil at every hearing and detention facility, a constant reminder, "We are watching you." At the Pentagon, Colonel Patricia Davis Tamara Clayton's longtime ally and General Gavin Grant could stay silent no longer. A historic internal hearing was convened in a solemn chamber, crackling with tension. There, Gavin Reed laid out the evidence in stark detail: unedited body cam footage, internal sheriff's department emails from Oakwood Springs, and living testimonies from hundreds of black victims caught in the internal processing machine. Colonel Davis, her voice sharp as a command, demanded that the Armed Forces Inspector General launch an independent investigación, concessions, no cover-ups. Simultaneously, investigative reporter Felicia Wang published her Pulitzer-winning series Profit and Prejudice, exposing a state-sanctioned network that leveraged arrest and conviction rates to siphon federal funds. Dry statistics became a damning indictment. For every 100 convictions, the department pocketed millions at the cost of thousands of innocent lives torn apart. Never before had both the public and the highest echelons of government exerted such unified pressure on a single abusive system. The twin forces of grassroots outrage and federal authority propelled the Oakwood Springs case into its final act. Federal District Judge Samuel Emerson was assigned to preside over the concluding trial. All documents, every witness statement, and even the WatchGuard vigilantes' stony gazes would converge beneath the vaulted ceilings of a federal courtroom. In the lead-up, news outlets interviewed veterans, attorneys, victims, and even, according to local Loria Police K9, that once participated in a wrongful arrest. One local paper blared, "From Oakwood Springs to the White House, America's Awakening." Online, the WatchGuard emblem shield and lightning bolt became a symbol of faith, justice tempered by the power of ordinary voices. In a final secret briefing at the Pentagon, General Grant looked Colonel Davis in the eye and smiled triumphantly. "We haven't just saved Tamara, we've rescued the soul of justice itself." And halfway across the country, Darnell Thompson quietly reviewed sign-up sheets for new volunteers, preparing for the day the federal trial would open when all of America could no longer look away. The federal courtroom fell into a hush that felt almost sacred, as Judge Samuel Emerson strode to the bench in his black robes, flanked by 2 stern-faced marshals. General Gavin Grant, 4 stars gleaming on his dress uniform, took a seat just behind the defense table, an unmistakable signal that this hearing carried the full weight of the United States Army. The gallery, packed shoulder to shoulder with veterans in dress blues, civilian activists, journalists, and survivors of Oakwood Springs' policing regime, leaned forward in collective suspense. Clearing his throat, Judge Emerson's voice rang out like a gavel strike. "All charges against Miss Tamara Clayton are hereby dismissed with prejudice. They shall never be refiled." Gasps of relief and spontaneous applause rippled through the room, only to be hushed by the judge's raised hand. He continued gravely, "This court formally acknowledges and apologizes for the flagrant civil rights violations and systemic abuse of power that Miss Clayton endured." A smile flickered briefly across General Grant's face before he rose, stepping onto the dais with the deliberate calm of a seasoned commander. "Your Honor," he began, voice resonant with authority. On behalf of the United States Army and, indeed, on behalf of every American who has ever sworn an oath to protect, please accept our deepest apologies. No citizen, and certainly no veteran, should ever be subjected to such disgraceful treatment. A ripple of subdued chuckles ran through the veterans in the back, recalling the absurdity that a Marine sniper once needed rescue by the very institution she'd sworn to defend. Tamara Clayton, now Colonel, U.S. Army Reserve, stood at the lectern, her uniform crisp, her demeanor composed. The tight press of cut-flower corsages at her lapel seemed almost comical amid the solemn formality. She inhaled, then spoke with clear, unwavering conviction. I stand here not merely for myself, but for the thousands of people of color who have been wrongfully processed, pigeonholed, and silenced by a system that treats their presence as a revenue opportunity rather than a call for justice. A murmur of agreement swept through the courtroom. She paused, a wry half-smile flickering across her lips. If even a decorated Maria Montessori student turned Marine sniper can be boxed into a cell because of the color of her skin, what hope does the average citizen have? The irony and its bitter humor landed like a spotlight on the systemic bias plaguing law enforcement. Tamara's gaze swept the courtroom, locking eyes with veterans, families, and onlookers alike. Today, this judgment marks more than my exoneration, it signifies a turning point. Dignity cannot be struck down by handcuffs, nor can truth be caged by quotas. We owe it to every person who walks into a police station knowing they might not walk out. As she stepped back, a hushed reverence settled over the assembled crowd. In that moment, the combined force of legal authority, military honor, and personal courage had delivered a verdict far beyond any paperwork. Justice, finally, had spoken, and it had done so with a clarity that no amount of prejudice could ever mute. In the weeks after the landmark verdict, the momentum Tamara Clayton ignited refused to cool. She founded the Clayton Justice Foundation, dedicated to supporting victims of racial profiling and abuses of power, especially fellow veterans, whose service no longer shielded them from prejudice. At the inaugural gala, Tamara quipped, "When in doubt, handcuffs won't unlock justice, collective action will," earning wry smiles from an audience of lawyers, activists, and a few uneasy former sheriffs in ceremonial guest seats. Gavin Reed, once a timid court-appointed defender, rode the wave of change to become the South's most sought-after civil rights attorney. He opened offices from Savannah to San Antonio, emblazoning each facade with the motto, "Law is for all, not just for ledger sheets." His favorite punchline to new recruits, "If you think the toughest clients were in court, try explaining subpoenas to a deputy sheriff." Meanwhile, Aurora Reed and Harper Sutton joined forces to launch Justice Connect, an annual forum bringing together prosecutors, defense attorneys, police chiefs, journalists, and survivors under one roof. Amid spirited panels like "When Body Cams Lie," Editing for Profit or Public Safety, attendees discovered that even the sternest police captain could laugh and admit, "Yes, we once thought quotas were adorable." Back in Oakwood Springs, interim Sheriff Denise Reed turned reform into policy overnight. She mandated permanent storage of all body cam footage, opened internal affairs files for community review, and appointed a community oversight council that included high school civics classes, because nothing says civic engagement like grilling your own police chief in person. "If you see something shady," Reed told students at the first town hall, "say something even if it's your math teacher." At the Pentagon, what began as a grudging nod to Tamara's plight blossomed into the Clayton Initiative, a mandatory racial bias training program rolled out across all branches. General Grant proudly announced, "We're swapping shoot first, ask questions later for listen first, then lead." His aides still teased him that it sounded like giving medics power tools, but attendance soared. The final, poetic touch came when a marble statuette, single open hand, palm facing sky, was unveiled before the federal courthouse. Inscribed at its base, "Justice does not need to shout, it needs to endure." As the ribbon fell, Tamara stood alongside Gavin, Aurora, Harper, and Denise, their diverse heights forming a living tableau of unity. A reporter offhandedly asked, "Isn't it odd to immortalize a slap?" Tamara smiled, her eyes shining. That slap only woke us up. This open hand reminds us to keep our ice-sand hearts open. From that day on, Tamara Clayton's story became required reading in law schools, police academies, and community centers nationwide, a vivid testament to courage, solidarity, and the unbreakable power of truth. This story teaches us a profound lesson. We cannot remain indifferent to the suffering of others, for silence equals complicity in injustice. The message conveyed is that every personal struggle truly resonates only when the community lends its strength, from tenacious journalists and committed lawyers to everyday voices offering support. Imagine if there were no steady pens to expose the truth, or no resolute legal advocates, would a wrongfully accused individual have the power to save themselves? Now, let the audience express their own viewpoints. What do you think of society's response to abuses of power? Have you ever witnessed or experienced a similar situation? Most importantly, when do you predict racial discrimination will finally be uprooted from our systems? Share your reflections and predict the year when discussions about injustice based on skin color become obsolete. This is not just idle talk, it's a call for each of us to bear responsibility. Only when we speak up together will any form of discrimination be forced to retreat.